All right, so happy Friday, guys. Well, for you, it's Friday. I'm filming this on Thursday. I said filming. That makes me old. But anyway, so now we're doing the moving on to one of the more difficult sections of the trig chapter. So it's going to be on special right triangles. Um, so the first thing is you need to memorize these two triangles. Now I know can't really force you to memorize anything just because when you take the test, it's going to be just open notes or whatever. But some of you guys are going on to trigonometry next year, and some of you guys are moving to advanced topics. But it doesn't matter which one you're going to because they're both going to have trigonometry. And when you get to the trigonometry chapter, depending on how the teacher teaches, they're going to make you memorize something. Now, there's two possibilities. My cat is using the cat scratcher right now, so that's what you're hearing. That's great. Perfect timing. Are you done yet? Are you done? Okay, good. All right. So yeah, you're either going to have to memorize something that's called a unit circle, or you memorize these two triangles. Highly recommend these two. Do a quick Google search of the unit circle, and you'll see why I say it sucks to memorize that. But anyway, so you have the 30, 60, 90 triangle. So what you need to memorize are the three side lengths of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So you have the square root of 3, 1, and 2. So notice that the hypotenuse is 2. The short leg of the triangle, the short leg is 1, and the long leg is square root of 3. So again, 1 is a short leg, 2 is a hypotenuse, square root of 3 is a long leg. The 1 is always across from the smallest angle, which in this case is the 30 degrees. The square root of 3 is across from the 60, and 2 is across from the 90-degree angle. So, and then you have your 45, 45, 90 triangle. So these are another special type of right triangle. So for these, the legs are the same length. They're both 1, and the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. So 45, 45, 90, but 2 of the degrees are going to be the same, so the two side lengths are the same. So you need to memorize these two because these are going to come up. So what we're going to do is we're going to use those special right triangles to be able to find missing side lengths of other right triangles that are similar to that one. So when I say similar, I mean they have the same degree measure, but they're different sizes. Same shape, different size. All right, so looking at this first example, you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. And we need to find the missing side length x. So this is one of the easier problems. So for these, the steps are going to be important, so make sure that you make note of these steps. And if you were the type of person to write stuff down, I would write these down. So first you need to figure out whether you're going to use sine, cosine, or tangent. And how do you figure that out? Well, you have to look at what's given in the triangle. So I see that I have across from the 90-degree angle, I have an x. So that means that that's going to be the hypotenuse. Remember, anything across from the right angle is going to be the hypotenuse. Then on the last section, we had theta, but that was because we didn't know the angle measure. But on this triangle, we know that it's 45 degrees. So that's why you don't have the theta anymore. But it still doesn't matter. You still go across from the 45-degree angle is going to be the 5. So that means it has to be the opposite side. And so that means that the remaining side is the adjacent. Now, out of these three sides of the triangle, only 2 of them actually have something written. And those 2 are going to be the opposite and the hypotenuse. So for that reason, the adjacent side is of no use to us because it has nothing there. So then what you do is you look at the 2 that you have left and figure out, so you have opposite and hypotenuse. So you have to ask yourself, is opposite and hypotenuse sine, cosine, or tangent? And if you memorize them from geometry or from yesterday, opposite and hypotenuse is going to be sine. So that means we're going to be, for this problem, we're going to be using the sine of 45 degrees. All right. And then what you're going to do is you're going to set up your fraction, your opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite is 5, hypotenuse is x. Because remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So that's what I did there. That's how I set up the problem in blue. And then what we need to do is figure out what is the sine of sine of 45. Well, that's where you go back to the 45, 45, 90 triangle that we memorized, that I told you need to memorize. So if you look at a 45, 45, 90, the legs of the triangle are 1 and the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. So we're going to write those in on this triangle that we have here. So identify the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is going to be the square root of 2. Let me write it this way. Hypotenuse is square root of 2, and the opposite side was 1. Again, just going off of these two. So then, so now we're going to replace, so now that we've done step 1, we figured out out of the 3 which one it's going to be. We've done step 2, we set up the equation. Step 3 is to substitute the value for sine, cosine, or tangent. Well, sine of 45 is going to be opposite over hypotenuse, so opposite over hypotenuse. So 1 over the square root of 2. And then bring down the 5 over x. Now it's really important that you line everything up and do these problems the exact way that I do it, just because it keeps everything organized, because these can get pretty difficult. All right, so we figured out sine, cosine, tangent. We set the equation up. We substituted the value. And then the last step is to cross multiply and solve. So if you remember solving equations by cross multiplying, so you would multiply diagonally. So you would do 1 times x is going to be just 1x. Well, you don't really need the 1, so I'll just write the x. So 1x. And then you multiply 5 times the square root of 2. Now, from Algebra 1, you should know that numbers inside the square root can only multiply other numbers that are also inside the square root. Numbers outside of the square root can only multiply numbers outside of a square root. So what I mean is the 5 and the square root of 2 cannot actually multiply each other to give you 10. All you can do is just write 5 square root 2. If you wanted to, you could have the 1 in front of the x, but like I said, you don't really need it. And then this one's already solved because it's 1x. So there's your answer. So that missing side length of the triangle was 5 square root of 2. All right, let's do another easier one. So I have here a triangle. Looks like I have this x and the 100, and I have a 60-degree angle. So that means that this triangle is a 30, 60, 90. So step 1, figure out if it's sine, cosine, or tangent by looking at the angle that's given and the two sides. So it looks like, again, across from the right angle is going to be your opposite side, and across from the angle that's given is going to be the, well, hold on, I just messed that up. Across from the right angle is your hypotenuse, and across from the angle that you're given is the opposite. All right, so then, and then the third one is adjacent, but this one doesn't have anything, so we're not going to use the adjacent. So then, which one uses opposite and hypotenuse? We use sine for that one. So I'm going to write sine, and you're going to set up your fraction. So sine of 60 degrees, set up your fraction. Opposite over hypotenuse would be x over 100. All right, and then now we need to figure out, we need to substitute the value for sine of 60 degrees. So if we go back to the triangle that I told you had to memorize, keep in mind that, so we're talking about the 30, 60, 90 triangle this time. So looking at the 30, 60, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is 2, And what do we have? The 60-degree angle. So we need the opposite to the 60. So opposite of the 60-degree angle is going to be the square root of 3. So then that's what we need to use on this triangle. So again, I'm going to write these in. Hypotenuse was 2, and opposite of 60 degrees was the square root of 3. All right, so then I set up my opposite over hypotenuse for that one. So sine of 60 is going to be opposite is square root of 3, hypotenuse is 2. And bring down the x over 100. And now that I substitute it in, last step is to cross multiply and solve. So multiply the 2 times the x, so that's going to be 2x. And multiply the 100 times the square root of 3. Again, numbers in roots can only multiply other numbers in roots. The 100 is not, therefore all you can do is just write 100 square root of 3. Now let me move this equation over so that I actually have room to solve it. Though there's only one step, all you got to do is divide both sides by 2. And again, numbers that are not in roots can only divide other numbers that are also not in a root. So what I mean to say is the 2 can only divide the 100 to be 50. The 2 does not divide the square root of 3. Because the square root of 3 can only be divided by other square roots. All right, and there's your answer. So again, that's another easier one with the added step for solving. All right, so now we're going to move on to ones that are difficult. And it's difficult just because of the way that you solve the equation. So first step is to figure out whether it's sine, cosine, or tangent. So let's label the sides. Across from the hypotenuse is going to be, or across from the right angle is your hypotenuse. Across from the angle that's given is going to be opposite. And the one that's left is adjacent. And then again, you only look at the ones that actually have something written there. So the adjacent and opposite have something, hypotenuse does not. So I'll erase that. Now out of the 3 trig ratios, which one uses opposite and adjacent? That's going to be tangent. So we're going to be doing tangent of 60 degrees and set up your opposite over adjacent. So that would be 7 over x. Now we need to find what is the value of tangent of 60 degrees. So again, back to the triangle you had to memorize. So let's see, we need opposite and adjacent for the 60. So opposite of the 60 is going to be the square root of 3, and adjacent to the 60 is 1. So opposite is square root of 3. So that means this one's going to be the square root of 3, and the adjacent is going to be 1. So set up your fraction for tangent of 60. So opposite of our adjacent would be square root of 3 over 1. Bring down the 7 over x. And now you're going to cross multiply to solve this. So you're going to multiply 1 times 7 is 7. And square root of 3 times x is going to be, again, you can only multiply them if they were both in roots, so all you can do is just write square root of 3 times x. Now to solve this one, we need to get rid of the square root of 3. Well, if it's multiplying times x, that means to solve it you have to divide by square root of 3. So then these cancel out. You just have your x. And then that equals 7 divided by the square root of 3. Again, the square root of 3 is, or the 3 is in a square root, therefore it cannot divide the 7. Now, here's where this one gets tricky, because What are we always supposed to do with fractions? You're supposed to simplify them. Now, whenever you have a square root inside a fraction, it's not considered simplified if you have a square root on the bottom. So that means we need to fix that. So now this is what you do in order to simplify this fraction. So we have 7 over the square root of 3. Now, the goal is we need to get rid of the square root on the bottom. What you need to do in order to get rid of the square root is multiply by that same exact square root. So we need to multiply by that same square root of 3. And then whenever you do to the bottom, you have to do the exact same thing to the top. So the top also gets multiplied by the square root of 3. And then this is what it's going to look like. So you multiply the top times the top. So 7 times the square root of 3. Again, one's in a root, the other one's not. So you can't multiply it to give you 21. But you can multiply the bottom. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 would be square root of 9. And then from here you simplify it. Because what is the square root of 9? You can actually do that now. Square root of 9 is 3. So there you go. So then your answer is going to be x equals this. 7 square root of 3 over 3. Now I know that doesn't look simpler to you guys, but it's just something you have to do for all fractions. I'm going to pretend like that text didn't come up. All right. So now that's that one. Last problem. So again, just another one of these difficult problems. So again, start by labeling it. Across from the 90 degrees is going to be your hypotenuse. Across from the angle that's given is going to be opposite, and the remaining one's going to be adjacent because it's next to the given one. And then remember, you only care about the ones that actually have something there, so there's nothing for the opposite, so I'll erase that. So we're looking at adjacent and hypotenuse. So out of the 3 trig ratios, which one uses adjacent and hypotenuse? That one would be cosine. So we would be doing cosine of 45 degrees. And then you set up your fraction, your ratio. So adjacent over hypotenuse would be x over 40. Now we need to figure out what is the value for cosine of 45 degrees. So then again, you're going back to that triangle that you need to memorize. So remember, both legs are 1 and the hypotenuse is the square root of 2. So if I wrote that in, so the legs of the triangle are going to be both are 1 and the hypotenuse is square root of 2. So don't need this one. So again, you do adjacent over hypotenuse for that. So adjacent over hypotenuse would be x over, no, not x over. Adjacent is 1 and hypotenuse is square root of 2. Bring down the x over 40. And then cross multiply and solve. So x times the square root of 2 is going to be square root 2 times x. And 1 times 40 is going to be 40. And then you got to solve it. So you have to get rid of the square root of 2. Square root of 2 is multiplying the x. So divide by square root of 2 on both sides. And so these would cancel out. You just have the x on the left. And then on the right side, you have 40 divided by the square root of 2. Again, you can't divide the 40 by 2 because the square root doesn't let you. But you do have to simplify this fraction. So that means we need to get rid of the square root on the bottom. Just like last problem, multiply by whatever the square root is. So multiply by the square root of 2, multiply by the square root of 2 on the top. So your answer Well, then you multiply the top times the top, that gives you 40 square root of 2. You multiply by the bottom times the bottom, so that would be square root of 4. And then you can simplify the square root of 4, so that's what I'm going to do now. So that would be 40 square root of 2, and then on the bottom, what is the square root of 4? Square root of 4 is just 2. And this one actually can be simplified even further because you can divide those numbers. So 40 divided by 2 then is going to give you your final simplified answer of 20 square root of 2. Again, this 2 can only divide numbers that are outside of a root since that one's outside of the root. So this 2 is protected by the root there. So there you go. So here's your homework. These are going to be difficult, I can guarantee you. So make sure you take your time to understand the notes. If you have any questions, by all means ask your questions. I'm also going to try to put Mr. Mostella's video, that way you can see somebody else working out similar problems. Just make sure you do the homework from this video. And hope you guys have a good weekend.